you.
So last time I talked about Rav Kook's approach to the brothers of Yosef. For Rav Kook, this is a watershed moment in Jewish history. You have the children of Leah and the children of Rachel. Rachel has two children, Binyamin and Yosef. There's also the children from Bilhah, but for some reason the children of Bilhah sort of see themselves more connected to the children of Leah and the children of Zilpah. Because in the end of the day, the 10 tribes included the children of Bilhah. When they broke off with the northern kingdom under the time of Rechavam ben Shlomo and under the time of Yerovam ben Nevat, who basically created this coup d'etat and took over the northern kingdom of Israel. Shalom Pinchas. Now, according to Rav Kook, Yosef represents this universal idea. And the universal idea is represented in his dream of the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to him. Now, out of the two dreams of Yosef, the first dream, which was the bundles of wheat of his brothers bowing down to him, this was a dream of a young man dreaming about being the mefarnes, being the one who's going to provide for the rest of the family. But the second dream, and that's why the first dream, Yosef told his brothers, Vayaged lechav, which in Hebrew means to tell them, like to tell them off. You think I'm nothing, I'm just sitting at home. One day you'll see, I will be the provider for the whole family. Yosef didn't realize that his first dream was also prophetic. It's his second dream that he tells to the brothers and to his father. And in the second dream, the sun, the moon, and the stars are bowing down to him, and Yosef does not know why. And in this one, it doesn't say Vayagid, it says Vayesaper, which is much more doucement, Vayesaper. In other words, I'm just telling you, I really don't understand. And Yaakov is the one who gives the interpretation of the dream. He's the one who says, Havo navo ani v'imcha v'achecha v'ishtachavot lecha arza. Can it be that myself and your mother and your brothers will bow down to you? Rashi, of course, says, your mother can't bow down to you because she passed away. However, Rashi claims that Bilhah was still alive, and Bilhah brought Yosef up because Rachel passed away. So Yosef does not, Shalom Pamela, so Yosef does not understand his prophetic dream. But Yaakov, who is a prophet, right away understands the meaning of the dream. And the interpretation of the dream is given by Yaakov. And it says, Vaviv Shamar Tadavar. His father remembered this dream. Maybe something will happen. Retroactively, it turns out that both dreams were prophetic. Both the first one, which Yosef thought came from his own thoughts, and the second one. He was both a provider for his family, as he was for Egypt, and also the sun, the moon, and the stars were bowing down to him because he was a second in line in the world power of that day, of those days. By being the second in line of the world power, you might say it's sort of like being a Trotsky under Lenin in communist Russia, if you want to put it that way. Or maybe a Henry Kissinger in the United States, who is Sarachutz, but of course he was not the vice president. So Yosef really has the ability to see through with his idea of universalism. Now, Yosef's idea of universalism, according to Rav Kook, was a question of haste. Now that we have the belief in the one God, and it's obvious that this belief has to be disseminated among mankind, we have to take them as quickly as possible away from paganism. And look at the proof, Avraham. He destroyed the idols of his father, according to the Midrash, in order to prove to his father that you cannot worship idols. Okay, we don't have to destroy their idols, but we should destroy them ideologically and tell them that we need is the belief in the one God. You know, Freud has a book called Monotheism. I think it's, what's it called again? I think it's Totem and Monotheism or something like that. No, there's Totem and Taboo. There's another one on monotheism. I forget at the moment. In his book on monotheism, Freud argues that the Pharaoh that Joseph is talking to was Akhenaten. The Pharaoh believed in the sun god, and Joseph the opposite. He claims that Akhenaten was the time of Moses, and Akhenaten, who was the one who believed in the sun god, he taught Moses about monotheism. That's Freud's argument, that Moses learned the idea of monotheism from Akhenaten, who is the one who believed in the one God, Ra, right, which is the God of the sun. I want to say the exact opposite, that maybe Akhenaten was the Pharaoh who was during the time of Joseph. And the reason why Akhenaten believed in the God of the sun was because Joseph did whatever he could. I'm sorry, Yonatan, John Assman said what?
The theory that Akhenaten was the one who taught Moses about this. Was a German Egyptologist.
Oh, so that's probably where Freud took it from.
Yeah.
So, and my argument is that Akhenaten might have been the guy who was influenced by Joseph. Because if you look in the Joseph story, when Joseph is brought before Paro, and it's obvious to him that this is now the moment, his moment of glory, the moment where the dreams are going to now come true. And Pharaoh says, do you know how to interpret dreams? And Joseph says, no, God knows how to interpret dreams. And the truth is, Joseph is not lying. Because until that point, according to Rashi, Joseph had not interpreted any dreams at all. His own dream was interpreted by his father. The dreams of the baker and the Saramashkim Sarafim, the butler and the baker, according to Rashi and the Midrash, were interpreted by each other's dream. It says each one dreamt his own dream and the pitaron, the solution to the other person's dream. So until then, Joseph just put one and one together. He didn't actually interpret the dreams until then. So when Pharaoh says, can you interpret a dream? And Joseph says, God interprets dream. He's not being modest. He's just telling the truth. Okay. And if you look in that story in Bereshit, how many times Joseph says God will interpret the dreams? I'm sorry, my library is a little bit upside down. In Parashat Miketz, if you look in Parashat Miketz, where Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him his dream, and then they bring Yosef. He says, Pharaoh says, Ani shamate elecha, I heard that you know how to solve dreams. Joseph said, no, God knows what Elohim yanech lam Paro. God will answer you. It's not me. That's number one. And then Paro tells Joseph his dream. And after he tells Joseph his dream, Joseph says to Paro, your dream is what? One dream. And what God is about to do, he's telling Paro. So he mentions God a second time. And then he tells him what it is. And then he says there's 7 years and 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty. And the reason why the dream is given twice is because God is bringing this quickly and it's going to happen for sure by God. So we're already up to 5 times that he mentions God's name. And then he says, then you should have somebody who will be in charge. And then Pharaoh gets the idea. And he says to his servants, is there a person that we know who has the Spirit of God in them? So he's already converted Pharaoh to the belief in the one God, just by saying it over and over and over again. So Pharaoh says, okay, I don't think I know anybody like that, so maybe it should be you. Joseph is interested in getting Pharaoh interested in monotheism. According to, by the way, J.J. Hertz, who was the chief rabbi of Britain, the Pharaoh that Joseph was talking to was the Pharaoh from the Hyksos tribe, which was a Semitic tribe which had taken over Egypt for a period of time. And that's where they had a certain soft side for the Hebrews, who were also Semitic. And then eventually they were taken over by the original Egyptians. That was the next Pharaoh who took over from them. And that next Pharaoh is not sympathetic to the Hebrews anymore. That's J.J. Hertz, I don't know based on what, but it must have been on other writings that had existed at his time when he wrote this in the 1950s. Anyhow, the point is that it seems, and I mentioned last time too, that Josephus Flavius claims that Joseph requested all the Egyptians circumcise their sons. And this is also brought in the Midrash, in Midrash Rabbah. So it's quite interesting that Joseph, remember, in the Abrahamic religion at the time, there was belief in God, there was Brit Milah, and if you want, you can add to that the 7 Noahide laws. And that's it. The only thing different for the house of Abraham was belief in the one God, which was not prevalent at that time, and of course, Brit Milah. So, I'm sorry. Just a little hard for me to talk because of my laryngitis. That's all I'm saying. So it appears that Joseph wants to be the viceroy of Egypt. And of course, he dresses an Egyptian and he has to play the part. He has this goblet, which according to that goblet, Joseph says that he can guess the future. Because remember, in antiquity, power was to know the future, was to know things that human beings cannot know. It was to know esoteric knowledge, was to know the future. That's why astrology was very, very popular already by the Egyptians and the Babylonians. If there was a point of studying astronomy, it was to bring you to astrology, to know how these stars influence the universe. Because after all, if the moon can influence the tide, and that's just one, maybe the other ones can even influence our lives. That's the way they thought. So this is Joseph's universalism. Yehuda, according to Rav Kook, is a particularism. Particularism really means there might be a futuristic idea of Jewish universalism, but we're much too premature. We have to first build up the Jewish people as an entity. We're not even a people yet. We're just a tribe. We're 70 people. And after this entity is built up, and we have our own country and we have our own institutions, then we will really be universalistic. Joseph might understand the value of Yehuda, but he thinks it's a question of time. Are we really going to wait hundreds and hundreds of years until the Jewish people is built up in order to disseminate the idea of the belief in one God? How long are we supposed to wait? It's interesting that there's the Talmud says on the pasuk in Yeshayahu chapter 2, where it says that all the nations shall come up to the house of God and say, El Beit Elohi Yaakov, to the house of Jacob, and say, teach us from your ways, because of Zion shall go forth the Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. So the Talmud says, why is it called the house of Yaakov specifically? Why not Avraham and Yitzchak? So the Talmud says they call it the house of Jacob, lo ke'Avraham shekra'o har, not like Abraham who called it a mountain, because Abraham called Mount Moriah Har Hashem Yera'eh, the mountain on which God sees. Not like Isaac who called it a field, because it says, Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot erev. He went out to the field to talk or to pray in the afternoon. And they say that was also Mount Moriah, even though geographically it doesn't make sense, but that's what the Midrash says. But like Jacob who called it a house, because Jacob says, Ein zeh ki'im beit Elokim, this is the house of God and the gate to heaven. What does it mean that Avraham calls the temple a mountain? A mountain is open up for the whole world. Everybody can come on a mountain. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular. That's called universalism. Avraham is Av Hamon Goyim. He is the father of many nations, and he brings those nations to the belief in one God. And that is his job. Yitzchak is a little bit more particular. It's like a field which is fenced in. In a field, you could have quite a few people. They could have different types of people in the field too. They could be coming and going in the field. That's like halfway between universalism and particularism. Jacob is a house. In a house lives one family. And it's closed to the outside. And is protected from the outside. That's called the house of Jacob. What is going to interest the nations of the world in futuristic times is the particularism of the Jewish people, not the universalism. The universalism will happen, by the way, by itself, because once you're interested in the particularism, you want to know how it's going to influence your life. I've always said that one of the things that I find that attracts people to Judaism from the outside, one of the things, from a sociological point of view, I think, is the fact that in Judaism, there's a very strong sense of belonging. The idea of family, the idea of keeping together. We have certain values of what we are allowed and not allowed to do in order to ensure the transmission of Judaism from generation to generation. And we live in a culture today where people don't have that much of a sense of belonging anymore. Definitely not in the West. Maybe in the East they do, maybe in the Middle East they do. But in the West, the sense of belonging has become a little bit watered down. And sometimes when you see people have strong concepts of family and belonging, which is a strong concept of identity, people become interested what exactly that means. That's what I mean, that sometimes the particularism leads to universalism. The people look, how interesting, like, what are they doing to keep themselves together in that sense? But then as they look in, it has a universal influence as people are looking in from the outside. So at this moment then, we have two ideas, the idea of Judah, the particularism, and the idea of Joseph. Now, Yaakov at this point actually thinks that Joseph is going to be the continuation. Ele toldot Yaakov Yosef. It says these are the generations of Yaakov, Joseph, even though it says Joseph was 17 years old. But there's a drasha, as if it's continuation of Yaakov. At that point in time, Joseph has his moment of glory. He's there at the top of the world. Finally, he has the possibility to implement his ideas and bring it to the Egyptians. And in a sense, you might say that God is there to back him up. Because when Moses speaks to God at the burning bush, at the sneh, so Hashem says to Moshe, I'm sending all these plagues. First he'll do this, do that. And Moshe's probably thinking, why do we need 10 plagues? Let's just get them out. Well, what do we need? Another one. And Kosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. I want the Egyptians to know that I'm God, not just the Jews. V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. So it sounds like there's also a universal message that Hashem wants Moshe to bring to Egypt through these plagues. V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. So maybe Yosef is right. It says in Tehillim, and we mentioned this in Hallel, B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, when the Jews left Egypt, Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez, the house of Jacob, again, this house of Jacob, from a foreign land, Haita Yehuda lekodsho Yisrael mamshlotav. Yehuda was now the sanctified one. Interesting, right? The Jews go into Egypt. When they come out, Yehuda becomes the sanctified one. What does it mean Yehuda becomes the sanctified one? That eventually the kingdom will come through Yehuda. Yaakov also says this, Lo yasur shevet b'Yehuda, the scepter of kingdom will always come from Judah. So why not Joseph? Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, Zecher Tzadik Libracha, once said, there are two concepts. You can be a universalist or cosmopolitan. You say Jews in the Golah can be cosmopolitan, which means they can see themselves as belonging to the larger world. And then they can give contributions to the larger world. But in the end of the day, if Freud is the founder of psychoanalysis, it's Freud who was the founder of the psychoanalysis and not the Jewish people. If Einstein was a great physicist, it was Einstein who was a great physicist and not the Jewish people. So Einstein can be cosmopolitan and Freud can become cosmopolitan, but it's not the Jewish people who are contributing to world culture. So he says you can be cosmopolitan outside of Israel, but if you want to be universalist, that happens in Israel. Because in Israel, when an Israeli professor gets the Nobel Prize, it's Israel, the Jewish state, which just won the Nobel Prize. And everybody says it that way. For the good or for the bad, by the way. Whatever happens in Israel is the Jews doing it. As if, even though there is a disproportionate amount of Jews who have won Nobel Prizes from day one, that's irrelevant. If there are 4 from Israel, that's the Jews who won Nobel Prizes. I think he was right on that. That it's easier for us to be universalistic through the state of Israel, because now we are back to the stage of nations. And nations look seriously at other nations. Individuals are nice, but they don't represent anybody in particular. The nations represent themselves. So you can be cosmopolitan in Chutz La'aretz, you cannot be universal. At a certain point, according to Rav Ashkenazi, this is things I heard many years ago through his student Rav Uri Sherkin. At a certain point, Yosef also comes to this realization. It's not that Yosef does not believe in universalism anymore. He's starting to wonder if maybe he was premature. When does that happen? The Midrash says that when Yosef was approached by Potiphar's wife, who tried to seduce him, the Midrash says he looked up and he saw the image of his father Jacob, and then he ran out of the house. Of course, this sounds very Freudian. He saw the image of his father Jacob. It's like a super ego, you have the parents who are in your head, which is the higher ego, whatever. But the interpretation is, and there is an midrash like this too, that Joseph was tempted almost fell into the claws of Potiphar's wife until he saw this image of Yaakov, and then he ran out. So Rav Ashkenazi explained, what does it mean he sees the image of Yaakov? It dawns on him that his children will not be part of the people of Israel anymore. And when he realizes that, he realizes the danger of rushing into universalism before you are ready. And that's why he runs out. So the danger of jumping into universalism before you are ready is the danger, of course, of assimilation. And therefore, on his deathbed, Yosef says to his brothers, Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem, God will remember you. Valitem et atzmotai mizeh etchem, and please take my bones out of here when you leave. Because I don't want to remain in Egypt, and I don't want to become another god of Egypt. And when Moshe takes the Jews out of Egypt, in Parshat Beshalach, it says that Moshe, Vayikach et atzmot Yosef imo, he took the bones of Yosef. Because Joseph made the Jews take an oath when he said, when you leave, take my bones out of this. God will remember you. And when Hashem appears to Moshe in the burning bush, he says, I want you to tell the Jews, pakod pakadati etchem, the exact language of Yosef. So they will know that it's a continuation. Yosef said, God will remember you, so you have to say the exact words of Yosef, because then they will recognize that you are the emissary, which is what Moshe does. This idea of Yosef doing tshuva, it's partial tshuva. The tshuva is not that the universal idea of Judaism is wrong. It just means it was the wrong time. And therefore, Yosef wants to go back to Zion. The Midrash says that while the Jews were in Egypt, Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, the son of Joseph, tried to leave Egypt by force before Moses. They tried to make a little rebellion and leave Egypt, and unfortunately, it was overturned by Pharaoh by force, but they tried. They wanted to go, but you can't do it unless God allows it. And Yosef, of course, in Gematria is 156. 156 is the Gematria of Zion, which is Zion. So, Kol ma shekara Yosef kara Zion. There's a drasha like that. It's also in the book Kol Hator. The Zionism of Yosef is when he realizes that his universalism is premature, and the only way to actually realize it is by going back to Zion. That's why it's actually quite interesting that the movement to come back to the land of Israel was called Zionism. And one of its founders in modernity was Binyamin Ze'ev Hershel, right? Which is the name of one of the children of Rachel, Binyamin Ze'ev. In fact, the interesting thing is that in the generation of early Zionism, at the beginning of the state, the most popular name in the land of Israel was Joseph and Yossi. You can even check the phone books. In the previous generation, before the state of Israel, the most popular Jewish name was Moshe. Moshe takes us out in the desert. Joseph brings us into the land. And Yossi and Yosef were definitely the most popular Jewish names. So what does this mean? There was a rabbi in Jerusalem, his name was Rabbi Levi Nachmani. He was, I think he was Moroccan-born Kabbalist, lived here in Ramot. Very interesting individual. He used to give a shiur in the old city every Thursday night at 12 o'clock in the old city. He taught Adir Bamarom, which is a book written by Ramchal on the Idra. And I met him as a very young man in my early 20s. And he once told me a very interesting idea, which I have not seen any other sources for it. So maybe it was his own idea, but then I never really knew. I didn't ask him where he took it from. You know, when you're very young, you never ask questions like that. When you're older, you will enter like, what were the sources? It's like, because you want to, develop it more. So his idea was something like this. He says, when the Jews come back to Zion, there are 4 stages that they must go through. It's called Kedusha u'Malchut, sanctity and royalty. There are two levels of sanctity and two levels of royalty. The two levels of sanctity, you could probably guess, it's called Kohen Levi. Those are two levels of sanctity. The two levels of royalty are Yosef and Yehuda. And sometimes instead of Yosef, it's also Binyamin, because both of them are children of Rachel. They represent the other side of the family, the children of Rachel. So let's start from the beginning and just try to understand this. When the Jews leave Egypt, you have Aharon the Kohen, you have Moshe the Levi, you have Yeshua, who's from the tribe of Ephraim, and you have Kalev ben Yefuneh, who is the first judge in the land of Israel from Yehuda. So in this 40-year period of leaving Egypt and coming into the land, you have Kedusha Malchut, you have the whole gamut. Aharon the High Kohen, Moshe the Levi, Joshua, who brings them into land, is from the tribe of Ephraim, the son of Yosef, and Kalev ben Yefuneh, who is the next judge after him, who's from Yehuda. That's the entering the land. Now, as we move later on into the first temple period, before the temple is, in the time of the Shoftim. So you have Eli the Kohen, you have Shmuel the Levi, who is a student of Eli. You have Shaul from the tribe of Benjamin, who is from Rachel, and then you have David from Yehuda. Okay, so again, you have the full gamut. Again, you have Eli, the high priest, the Kohen. Then you have Shmuel, the Levi, who is the last of the judges. Then you have Shaul from Binyamin, from the tribes of Rachel. And then you have David from Yehuda. Then, in the Second Temple period, that was the second time you had it. Second Temple period, as the Jews come back to Israel for the second time after the destruction, you have Ezra the Kohen, who also rectifies the Torah by finding all the various different editions that were going around of the Torah. He restores the true tradition, Ezra HaSofer. So he's the Kohen. I can't remember who the Levi is. Of course, all Kohanim are Levim. And then you have Nehemiah from the tribes of Joseph. And you have Zerubbabel from the tribe of Judah. So again, you have the Kuna, and every Kohen's a Levi. So Ezra, Nehemiah from the tribes of Joseph, and Zerubbabel, who is from the tribe of Judah. And eventually, in the Messianic times, which we have to explain what that means, Kufat Geulah. So you have Eliyahu, who according to the Talmud was a Kohen, and Mashiach ben Yosef, the Mashiach, the son of Joseph, and the Mashiach, the son of David. So again, it goes through that same phase, Yehuna u'Malchut. In the between, you have two aborted attempts of Messianism. One of them is called Purim, and the other one is called Chanukah. These are aborted attempts, which means they are partial Geulah, and therefore they do justify saying a Hallel. The Talmud, however, says we don't say Hallel on Purim because it happened in Chutz La'aretz, but we do say it on Chanukah. Another opinion of why we don't say the Hallel on Purim is that the Megillah is like Hallel, but that sounds like a lame excuse, even though the Talmud says it. Let's just look at Purim for a moment. In Purim, you have Mordechai and Esther. Both of them are from Benjamin, right? From Joseph. So it can't continue. You need somebody from Yehuda for it to happen. So you have just the end, almost the end. You have step 2, if you want to call it, out of 3 steps, or step 3 out of 4 steps, depending on how you look at it. Sometimes the coin includes the Levi, but you always have a differentiation between Joseph and David. So if you have somebody from Benjamin, that's good, but it's only good for Chutz La'aretz. It's a temporary salvation. Hanukkah too, you have the Kohen, who's the beginning. But there's nobody from Joseph and nobody from Judah, so it doesn't work. It falls apart. So these are aborted attempts of redemption. They work for a little amount of time, but they didn't follow the gamut of the process, and therefore they didn't work. So now let me explain a little bit more about Joseph. That was an idea I just told you from Rabbi Levi Nachmani, of blessed memory. So the idea of Joseph, then, what is it? First of all, I said that Joseph represents the transitory period, the temporary period. I mentioned this last time. So you have the temporary king, which is Shaul from the children of Rachel, and you have the permanent king, which is David. Once it says Lo Yasur Shevet Yehuda, the scepter cannot leave Yehuda. Once there's Yehuda, the scepter cannot leave. Before there's Yehuda, it can be anybody. So you have Shaul, and from the time David is king, that's it. And not only is it only Judah, but it has to be from the house of David, because I think it was Natan Navi who promised David. Who promised David that the kingdom will never leave his particular family. And therefore, we talk about the later Messiah as being Mashiach ben David, because it has to be from the lineage, from the monarchy of David. The second temporary thing is the Kedusha. We said you have Kedusha and Malchut. Malchut, as I said, is the king before. Then you have Kedusha. In Kedusha, you had Mishkan Shiloh, the tabernacle in Shiloh, which stood for 400 years after it left the desert. It was put together in the desert under Moshe. It stood in Shiloh, which is, by the way, in the tribe of Joseph, in the tribe of Ephraim. It stood there for 400 years until it was replaced by the temple during the time of Shlomo. And once you have the temple in the time of Shlomo, this temple has to remain, and there's no more bamot. No altars can be brought anywhere else, not even in Shiloh. And even if the temple is destroyed, no altars can be anywhere else aside from the Beit HaMikdash. Yisur bamot, which the people had a very difficult time about in the Book of Kings, because they didn't understand. My grandfather, who was a very religious man, used to bring an offering on this bama in my city in Haifa. Of course, they didn't have Haifa in those days, on the Carmel Mountain. How come today it's not allowed? You think my grandfather was a bad Jew? I said, no, your grandfather was great, but unfortunately the law changed. Laws don't change. We're Orthodox, okay? So people had a problem with this. What do you mean Shlomo said all of a sudden the bamot are no good? V'lama miata, we would say. You changed the law. It says, I didn't change the law. It says in Sefer Dvarim, b'makom asher yivchar Hashem, the place that God will choose. He didn't choose yet. Now he chose. Okay, that's just what it says in the Torah. People had a problem with that. It took generations for them to accept this idea that it's only in Yerushalayim. It took generations. And they all fought against it. Even in the southern kingdom, the bamot, everybody had a problem with the bamot, all the kings. Getting the people to stop the bamot. It's over. Nigmar. So, yeah. So you, as I said, you had Shiloh, again, you had the temporary king and the temporary sanctuary, the temporary temple was also in Yosef. Then you had the temporary people. You had the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes who split off under Yerovam ben Nevat from the southern kingdom. So also nationally, you had a temporary national state, which was called Yisrael or Ephraim. And then you had Judea in the south. Now, the name Judea might have been temporary, but they're the ones who are permanent because They're the only ones that we actually know who still exist. That's why we're all called Jews. We all came from Judea. And probably 90% of us come from the tribe of Yehuda. So now, obviously, if this modern state of Israel would have been called Judea, there would have been, as I said last time, there would have been a certain advantage, because if Jews went to Judea, everybody would understand that we're indigenous to this country. But the original name was Israel. And you don't toy around with the original name. So if you want authenticity, we are Yisrael. And the truth is, that's our name. We are Am Yisrael, even if most of us come from 3 tribes, which is Yehuda, Levi, Yehuda and Levi, 2 tribes really. There might be a few Benjaminites around, because Benjamin was swallowed up by Judah. So there are 3 tribes around, and we have maybe a few from the other tribes hanging around among us too. But we still call ourselves Jews, even though we're Bnei Israel, like all the other tribes. And as you know, there's an argument in the Talmud and Sanhedrin whether the 10 tribes will come back. Because after all, Yeshayahu said in chapter 11, take 2 branches, one for Ephraim and one for Judah, and let them be one in your hand, which means that the prophet's saying that they will come back. Maybe they will. And work on it. There have been interesting books about where the 10 tribes are. A book by a fellow who was actually a professor, I think, of English literature, Professor Avigdor Shachar. He wrote a book about the 12 tribes, the 10 tribes and where they are today. Fascinating book. There was also a lot of research done about these things. Are they, the Pathans in Afghanistan, or maybe the samurai in Japan, or like there are a whole bunch of interesting questions about this, about the 10 tribes. Will they come back? Maybe. But look, the 10 tribes are more than us. Statistically speaking, there were 10/12 of the Jewish people. So if we are familiar with about 15 or 16 million Jews today, who are only coming from Judea, more or less, if you added the 10 tribes, you'd probably be at 100 million. Because even among the Jews, so many assimilated. When we were kicked out of Spain, there were about 600,000 Jews in Spain, and 400,000 left, maybe 300,000 left. That means about 5% of Spain, because there were only 6 million people in Spain at that time. That means 5% of Spain today should be Jewish, or at least descended from Jews. Some halachically and some not. But who knows who they are? There's so many Jews who ran away from being Jewish, especially after the war in the 20th century, did whatever they could to hide it. Constantly, I meet people who, they had this family member, that family member, who they think was Jewish, because it wasn't always feasible to be Jewish. Now with the state of Israel, everybody wants to prove documents that they were Jewish. For the state of Israel, everybody wanted to get rid of the documents proving that they were Jewish. So that was just the way things were. So the tribe of Judah is this temporary kedusha, temporary people, and also the temporary Messiah, the house of Joseph. When Joseph says, I want you to take back my bones, he means I want to help bring the Jews back. So what is the Messiah, the house of Joseph? According to the Zohar, and according to specifically Tikkunei Zohar, there are going to be many, many individuals that the soul of Joseph touches. And these people become inspired to help the Jewish people get back to their land. I won't talk about it right now, maybe next week. According to Vilna Gaon, there are 5 main goals during the period which is called the House of the Messiah of Joseph. One of the goals is to teach Torah, specifically the new insights of Torah, or the inner Torah, Sitrei Torah. Another goal is to build up Jerusalem. Another goal is to start the ball of the gathering of the exiles rolling. Not to complete it yet, but to get the ball rolling. As you know, you can't have a state without Jews. unless you're not trying to build a Jewish state. But you need people. You can't just build a state with 5 people and say, okay, we have a country. Okay, they did it in Qatar, but normally it doesn't work. Right? In Qatar, you have a few, 100,000 people or something like that who are citizens, and about 5 million who just work for them or something like that. Yeah, but if you really want to have a country, then you have to have people. So according to the Zohar, it's many, many people who get inspired. Even people who lived in antiquity. They say that the Ari, who when he was sort of like Mashiach ben Yosef, because he created a whole new understanding of Kabbalah, which was going to affect the ways Jews thought about Torah. Students of the Vilna Gaon thought that he was a messianic figure. So many people who, at least according to Tikkun Zohar, these people are in every generation, they're pushing. Rabbi Kook, there's a book written by Azriel Karlibach. Azriel Karlibach was the founder of Mariv newspaper. And he was a student in Rav Kook's yeshiva, Merkaz Rav, when the senior Rabbi Kook was alive. Remember, he died in 1935. And Karlibach founded Mariv newspaper probably in the 50s. So he has a book where he talks about personalities of the early 20th century, or the first half of the 20th century, and he has a short chapter on Rabbi Kook. In that chapter, he says they're walking towards the old city, and they're passing by the Mea Shearim area. And so, it goes like this. They're walking from the new city through the Mea Shearim area towards the old city. As they're walking through the new city, people throwing things at them and says, oh, you religious zealots, whatever. As they go towards Mea Shearim, then you have the Hasidim who see Rabbi Kook, and they throw things at him and says, oh, you Apikoros. And then they come towards the old city. And Karlibach, Azriel Karlibach says, this was his life. He got it from both sides. And then at the end, he says that one time Rav Kook on a Shabbat was speaking to his students, and he sort of hinted that his soul was from the soul of Ephraim, from the house of Joseph. That's Azriel Karlibach, and his name of the book is something like Ishim V'Tkufot or something like that. People and times, something like that, by Azriel Karlibach. You could probably find it in the National Library, which is now moving all their books to their new domain. So, but the idea of Tikkun Zohar is there are many people who are going to affect this. In the book Kol HaTorah, there's a different interpretation. Kol HaTorah is a book which comes from the Rivlin family. We're also influenced by the Vilna Gaon's ideas, but it's a book probably written within the Rivlin family. It's a little unclear which one. It might be a collection of a few people in the Rivlin family, possibly Moshe Magid, maybe Yitzchak Rivlin, probably maybe Yosha Rivlin, people who lived in the beginning to the middle of the 19th century, and definitely inspired by the writings of the Vilna Gaon. That's why they say it's ascribed to Hillel of Shklov. And in that book, they say that they have an interesting definition of the period of Mashiach ben Yosef, where they claim it's not an individual at all, but it's hakoach hamesayeh. It's like a power that influences people who want to help the Jewish people rebuild themselves on the land of Israel. If you get this special extra energy, if you try to do any of the goals of that period. If you want to rebuild Jerusalem, you'll get help. If you want to fight off Israel's enemies, you'll get help. You want to bring Jews on Aliyah, you'll get help. Hakoach hameshichi hamesayeh, this sort of like metaphysical power, which stems from the soul of Joseph, which is going to embellish the person who tries to perpetuate the goals of that particular time in order for them to work. That's an idea found in Kol HaTorah. I did not find it in other places, but it's a very interesting idea. As I said, in the Zohar, you have this idea of many people representing Mashiach ben Yosef. This is also brought in Kinat Hashem Tzvot by Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, where he's basically quoting it from the Zohar. It's idea. So what does this mean? I have to go back just another moment again and say, if there are two ideas within the Jewish people, which is the universalist idea and the particular idea, that means that they can create schisms. Because if there was a divide between Joseph and his brothers, and if Rav Kook is correct that the divide was over particularism and universalism, it could happen again. I would say it happened, let's say, in the 19th century. Between Jews who decided after emancipation, they wanted to be insular because of the fear of emancipation, or Jews who wanted to embrace emancipation and then also embrace Haskalah and foreign and outside culture in order to bring Jews to be part of the outside world. Now, in theory, both of these things can go together, as Samson Raphael Hirsch thought. But what often happens, it creates a divide, and the divide creates a war of ideologies, which is exactly what happened. You had the split. You had on one hand, the Orthodox communities, which were Orthodox and Haredi, which was an outcome of the emancipation. On the other hand, you had the Reform, the Jewish Enlightenment, which also became secular, the Jewish Bundists, who were socialists and secular, the Jewish Socialists, right? Then, of course, you had the ones who just gave up on emancipation and became Zionists in Eastern Europe, but you had religious Zionists and secular Zionists. So you had different reactions to this opening up of the world. But these reactions create schisms within the Jewish fold. And these schisms, of course, are unhealthy. Because whenever you have divisions within the Jewish people, especially outside of the land of Israel, but even inside the land of Israel, they create a breakdown of identity. And a breakdown of identity is what keeps us together. That's our feeling of belonging. When there's a breakdown of identity, or where there are too many identities and they don't seem to cling together or unite in any way, it weakens us. And when it weakens us, there's assimilation. When assimilation, the people start disappearing. But even in the land of Israel, the Kabbalists of Jerusalem claim that the early secular Zionists were a Gilgul, a reincarnation of the Biryonim of the First Temple period, which were the Jewish zealots who wanted to fight the Romans at all cost. And now they had to come back and fight for the land again because they fought the Romans before, which brought down the temple. So now they have to rebuild the temple again in Jerusalem in order to make up for this. I heard this from Rabbi Mordechai Atiyah. I don't know what the source is, but it's an interesting idea. Not that I can tell you who is the Gilgul of who. I think since the Ari, nobody really knows anymore. He wrote a whole book about it, but I guess as an idea, it's an interesting idea because those who created the divide also have to mend the ways. So according to this idea, then today in the state of Israel, if there are divisions, it's because we have to learn to live with them. And this is hard. It's really hard to learn to live with divisions because there are a lot of people who are going to say the opposite of you. And it's really hard to live with people who say the opposite of you. But we don't have any choice. And that's a very, very hard lesson. I agree. It's a very, very hard lesson. It's not easy. And our politicians don't make it easier. Everybody's trying to fight each other. That doesn't make it easier. I believe that we need a lobby of non-politicians to help mend the people. I'm not sure the politicians can do it. You know, in Hebrew, miflaga comes from pilug, which means a division. But I understand that. That's the way the political game works. But I don't think but life is not a game. This is a problem. I don't have a solution. I'm just stating the problem. And as I said, I'm not sure the political arena is going to solve it. But the political arena could be influenced by people of spirit and ideology. And these people can be a uniting factor. Meaning, let the politicians fight it out, but the people of spirit and ideology can be a sort of mending factor. Because in the end of the day, more or less every party in our parliament has a piece of the truth. Truth was not given just to one person or one party. But unfortunately, everybody's got to fight. And, I don't have an answer for that. I just wanted to put it upon. And it reminds me of the Joseph and the Judah divide. The Universalist divide, particular divide. There are those who say we have to do things to build up the Jewish people. And as Ben Gurion would have said, shmum, meaning who needs the UN, right? The famous statement by Ben Gurion. But on the other hand, you have the Universalists who say, no, we have to take into account what people are saying in the world. We can't pretend we're our own island. And they're also right. They're not wrong. The question is how you create a balance between what we call the Jewish and the democratic part of the state of Israel. And this can be done, but it has to be done with gloves of silk and not with punching gloves. Okay, I don't want to talk about that anymore. But I just want to say that this goes back all the way to Joseph and Judah, this divide. And in our generation, we're still living the history of the Jewish people. And one of our goals, and it's one of the hard ones, is to solve the problems within us, because there is no way for our enemies to bring us down, but we can bring ourselves down. And that is dangerous. And at the end of the day, you have to compromise if you want everybody together. Not everybody can have all their truths and everything they want. And the truth is, a lot of things on both sides that a lot of people agree with that can be worked out. Again, I don't know how to get to this, but I'm just saying that it's not new in the Jewish people. We've had these fights before. We've had in the Second Temple period. We have it all the way from Joseph and Judah. And okay, what I'd like to talk about next time, so I want to talk about the concept of Mashiachiyut. What exactly is Messianism? And to pinpoint the difference, I'm going to start based on the Rambam, the difference between Jewish Messianism and Christian Messianism, which I will show, which is vastly different in the concept. So I'll read a little bit of 2 places from Maimonides, from Rambam, one in his introduction to Perek Chelek, and another one in his Hilchot Melachim, just to show in general Rambam's point of view. That might take the whole next time. And then after that, I will talk about the view of the Vilna Gaon and Ramchal. Thank you very much. Maybe next time I should leave places also for questions, because I'm like talking the whole time. So